You're listening to A Deeper Dive, a part of the Winsight Podcast Network.
What is going on with MrBeast Burger? Hello, this is Jonathan Mays, Editor-in-Chief of Restaurant Business, and in this week's episode of A Deeper Dive, I talk with Joe Guszkowski, the Senior Editor at RB, to talk about virtual brands. And specifically, we spend most of the time talking about MrBeast Burger. Now, if you have not heard, MrBeast has said publicly that he has pulled his support from his virtual brand, MrBeast Burger. He has since pulled the tweets in which he has said this, but the comments generated a lot of attention. MrBeast is the most successful of a generation of virtual brands. And I talk with Joe about what his complaints are, what that might do to the virtual brand itself, and what it means to the whole trend of virtual brands if he is indeed stepping away. We also talk about NextBite, another virtual brand company that was recently sold to its rival. But most of our discussion is about MrBeast Burger and that whole mess. We're talking about virtual brands on this week's episode of A Deeper Dive, so please have a listen. Joe Guszkowski. Joe, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right, so Joe, I demanded that you be on the podcast because there is nobody better to answer the following question than you, and that is, what the hell is going on with MrBeast?
Well, MrBeast doesn't want anything to do with MrBeast Burger anymore, it seems, based on some tweets he sent out last week and then deleted. He said he's not happy with the sort of quality control of the brand. He wants to be able to guarantee that every location is going to serve good burgers and fries with his name on them. And apparently that's not happening. So he indicated that, he would, sounds like, ditch the brand altogether, but it's not his brand alone. It's a partnership between him and this company, Virtual Dining Concepts. So it appears that it'll keep going, but it's sort of lost his cosign, so to speak.
That seems like it's a problem for MrBeast Burger.
I think so, because, the whole reason the brand is successful to begin with is his massive following. He has 100 million YouTube followers. He just has this very engaged fan base that helped grow the brand into what it is, which is apparently about 2,000 locations worldwide. And, if he's not supporting the brand anymore, it's possible that some of those fans could stop ordering it.
Well, one of the things I think that worked for that brand so well is that you had an engaged namesake, I guess. And he's a spokesman for the brand. He is the namesake. And now that namesake is no longer supporting it. So the thing that he was able to do would be just periodically say something about the brand and make some sort of comment about, hey, order MrBeast Burger, whatever. Mm-hmm. Just send out a tweet, and then his followers be like, oh, I suddenly need a burger and fries delivered from MrBeast Burger. That you lose that seems like you're depriving your brand of a primary spokesman.
Mm-hmm. He has an entire platform. That's what the brand was built on. Mm-hmm. Not that its burgers are good or that its food is anything special or unique. It's just he has a huge audience, and now it appears to be going. So we'll see. I can't think of any other examples of this happening to a restaurant where sort of the main spokesperson went against the brand, while he or she was still attached to it.
Well, Joseph, I have some examples for you. So, I sort of liken this. Now, I got to clarify this. These are very, very different situations, obviously. And I would vastly much rather be in the shoes of the virtual brand here than the two examples I'm going to give you. But it's still sort of along the lines. And if you go back to 2015, when Subway lost its spokesman, Jared Fogle, in the worst way possible. And then the John Schnatter situation with Papa John's. is actually something relatively similar.
But I'm saying this is like the equivalent of like Ronald McDonald coming out and saying the Big Mac sucks.
It is. I mean, there is no real equivalent example. I mean, you probably have to go back to when I think it was the Pizza Hut founder became a Papa John's franchisee or something.
Mm.
I mean, I mean, I just say is like what happened with this scenario was along the same lines where you lost. I mean, he's a namesake. He was the guy they built the brand around, and that, and then to lose that. I just don't. There's got to be something that we don't know behind the scenes about some other situations. There's got to be, and I think he mentioned he signed a bad deal, and maybe there's something to that particular element. But at the same time, I mean, he's always been the type of person that would shoot off his mouth. I mean, there's got to be something else there, because this one, I just can't imagine that you wouldn't try to do whatever you could to appease him, because he's really important to the brand.
I think he does kind of fly by the seat of his pants a little bit. I mean, he's online constantly. He's saying things that I don't think that he's run by anyone, and he did delete the tweets. Part of me wonders if he's just kind of bored. I mean, when you think about it, he is the face of the brand, but I don't really know how much involvement he has with it anymore. I mean, these are individual restaurants that are operating the brand. I mean, I don't know if he's involved with the menu, in the marketing. I mean, he maybe is just bored, and he's got so much other stuff going on. This is probably the least of his concerns. And we don't know, how much money he's seeing from this. We don't know what the deal is. Mm-hmm. I mean, his complaint is definitely valid. I think it's a problem with a lot of virtual brands, that you can't guarantee the quality of the food across all these different operators. You don't have necessarily the layers of quality control that like a restaurant franchise might have. But at the same time, I mean, I think that's just restaurants in general. I mean, is there any large franchise restaurant chain where you can guarantee that any location you go to is going to be the same? I mean,
no, I mean, that's a great point. Like, look, if your goal is to guarantee quality, the last thing you want to do is operate a virtual brand. That's just 100% true. We've both pointed out on multiple occasions now that the issue with virtual brands basically boils down to the fact that you are relying on many different operators, all of whom, you might have a chicken wing virtual brand, and then you are going to rely on an Italian concept, a Chinese concept, or a burger concept, or a wing concept, or maybe a wing concept, or a bar and grill chain, or a seafood brand. None of them necessarily have, are, equipped specifically to produce that food item on a frequent basis. It's a secondary menu for them. Their primary business is picked up, and so it's probably easy to turn off. You're not really going to focus as hard on that. There's no real penalty if you fail for that. I get just Red Robin, for instance, and you're Red Robin and you are, you're doing MrBeast Burger, and you fail on a MrBeast order, well, you're just going to lose what? A small percentage of your total sales that you were doing basically to recover from the pandemic. Whereas if you screw up on a Red Robin order, well, then you've got some real penalties down the line. Then you lose a potential business that means a lot more revenue to you. So, and then you got ordering and all that other stuff. So I think that's just the absolute last thing you want. If you want to control quality, you have to company operate. I mean, franchising, by the way, is, that's a perpetual challenge in the franchising space. Mm-hmm. And it's one where, where you just, the less financially control you have over the restaurants, the less ability you have to control quality. I mean, and so, I mean, it's almost like a spectrum, I would say, Joe, where the most quality is going to be company owned. Chipotle will have more control over quality there, which makes its 2016 E. coli issue a real problem. But still, more control up there, the least amount of control, I think, with a virtual brand. These are real problems.
Yes, and I think that part of what we're going to see with virtual brands going forward now is the virtual brand companies are going to be looking to partner with big chains that have better operations, where they can guarantee the quality and they just get better scale. I mean, that's IHOP is one brand that's really leaning into virtual brands now. I think they've got like 4, and one of them is they're working with virtual dining concepts. And so that kind of works for both parties. And hopefully the consistency is a little better. I think the mom and pops, it's just hard if you're just distributed across the country and all these one-off restaurants. How do you keep tabs on that? That's why I think that's one of the reasons we're going to see virtual brand companies trying to partner with bigger chains that have better operations and can guarantee to a certain extent that the food's going to be consistent. Like IHOP is one of these that's using a lot of virtual brands now, and they have almost 2,000 locations that can scale the brands and have a little better oversight.
But then, I mean, I guess that sort of eliminates sort of one of the things that these virtual brand operators like to make note is that this was a way to save the independent restaurant. They were going to, we're doing this to save restaurants. And that's and then ultimately that's fine. I mean, it's not the particularly, but then the virtual brands become less about that and really more about, they're just trying to build brands. Why don't they just open up brick and mortar location? Serious. Like, why not just franchise a business? Like, if you have, like, MrBeast Burger is a perfect example. Why not just, because I believe MrBeast has even mentioned that, why not just franchise it? You can grow up quickly. You have more control over that. You're not spending your own money. You're spending a franchise's money. MrBeast has enough cachet that could probably get some operators interested pretty fast. I don't understand, like, why do you insist on, like, only being a virtual brand? I mean, it just seems like there's just an absolute cap here on where these brands can go on virtual brands. So they're just never going to make that much money per location.
I think franchising is just more complicated. I mean, and more expensive. Opening restaurants, building restaurants these days. I mean, it's just so much easier when you can just sort of turn it on online. It did seem like MrBeast Burger was kind of exploring a brick and mortar route. I don't know if that's going to happen anymore, but I don't know. I think you need a really, really strong brand to do that. And I don't think a lot of these virtual brands were really built to be really, really strong brands. I think they were built initially to just kind of catch your eye on apps and fulfill the SEO kind of requirements, Many of them don't have any personality at all.
That's true. Well, a lot of brick and mortar brands, Joseph, don't have a lot of personality.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess, like, to me, I agree with you. I think that chains are just far better equipped to do these virtual brands than anything else. And IHOP is a great example because it does have capacity at various times a day. I mean, I think Denny's has done some stuff as well. I mean, it's just Wings is still operating pretty well. I mean, I think that Chili's has sort of distanced itself at least somewhat from virtual brands, but they're still, I mean, it's just Wings, to me, was the one that absolutely had as much potential to go into a brick and mortar as anything else. And I still kind of think they should. Wingstop really doesn't have any legitimate large scale competition. They have, like, piecemeal competition. I mean, Buffalo Wild Wings is But Buffalo Wild Wings is still a full service operation. I mean, it would seem like wings is something where there could be some competition. So I don't know, but I agree.
Yeah, I think that sort of brings up another interesting point with these virtual brands, because I think It's Just Wings was super successful, but Chili's itself wasn't doing that great. And now they've got the new CEO there, and he's really returning the focus to Chili's and trying to fix that brand. And I think what happened was there might have been some drift in the focus. And, they had all these they had It's Just Wings, and that was doing so well. But I think when customers started returning to restaurants, a lot of these places had to shut off the virtual brands because they just couldn't do both. I agree, It's Just Wings is a strong brand, and maybe we will see them kind of scale it back up when Chili's is on better footing. But there are just a lot of issues with virtual brands that we've been talking about this whole time, and I think we're finally starting to see them materialize these past few weeks.
Yeah. I think that we're in, to me, like I believe we are in a shifting era. During the pandemic, consumers were not as concerned about things like speed, and they were giving operators a break. And like, if you went out to eat at a restaurant, you're going to give them a break about the length of time it would take you to get in. You're going to give them a break about, maybe weak service. If they didn't have stuff, you're giving them a break because you knew that this was an extraordinary time, and then they were doing the best that they can. But we're in an era now where consumers are, we're fully back. Everybody's open. The labor issues appear to have passed, and consumers are at the point now where they're starting to be concerned about their finances. In my view on eras like this, when people are starting to get into cutback mode, that their demands for service are higher in a time like this. And I think Kevin Hochman said this. So like your demand on service in an era like this is higher because if you're going out to eat, you are not going to want something that is not going to do their jobs. And that means that the secondary ideas like virtual brands will have to be even more secondary because you're going to have to focus on your core customer. And that's exactly where you should be focused on, because that's where you're getting the bulk of your revenue. That's where you're going to get the bulk of your profits. And that's the name that's out on the front. Mm-hmm. And that's your best advertisement, by the way, is always going to be the name of the restaurant that's out front, even if you have a virtual brand.
And just look at the casual dining chains that did well last year. Texas Roadhouse, they don't do virtual brands. Olive Garden, they don't do it. Longhorn Steakhouse, they don't do it. So they've been focused on their own brands this whole time, and I think you kind of started to see that pay off last year.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and both of those concepts, all those concepts are known for what? They're known for operations, really good operations. And this business really isn't rocket surgery. I mean, even if you look at, like, if you go into the fast food world where virtual fast food brands don't do virtual, but, you look at, like, and Chick-fil-A has been messing around with this a lot. They've done quite a bit with it, and they've done it separately in separate facilities. And where it's, that's what it was designed to do, and it's worked. We're so far, they haven't killed they keep expanding it very slowly, but they keep expanding it, so they're a lot more patient, I think, than some of these virtual brand companies. By the way, I'm probably going to get an email from like 5 virtual brand PR people because of this whole, both of us. Anyway, I want to shift to the NextBite stuff, because that was the other thing. I mean, there's 2 big issues, MrBeast and then the NextBite issue. What's going on with NextBite?
Well, NextBite is NextBite is no more, really. They split themselves apart, and they sold one part of the business to an Indian company, and they sold the virtual brand part to C3, which is another virtual brand company run by Sam Nazarian. And he's going to keep NextBite, but spin it off as its own thing. They had a bunch of layoffs about a month ago. It sounds like they pretty much got rid of most of their staff. And they were a company that raised a lot of money earlier in the pandemic, and it seems like the business itself could not sustain the money that they had raised. And it's still a little unclear, what the details are. But the brands themselves will live on apparently under C3. But they were a company that I don't know if they really had a brand that took off to the extent that MrBeast Burger did, or some of the other virtual brand companies. And I think that model just isn't right anymore. Like, you can't just have this library of brands that are just sort of generic burger, wings, salad concepts that no one recognizes. There has to be something more behind it. It has to be a little more strategic. And towards the end, they partnered with IHOP, for instance, and created some brands specifically for IHOP. But maybe that was too little too late. I don't know. But that just gets at, another issue with these brands is the actual building of the brands and how you create them and what works and what doesn't. It just seemed like NextBite never really figured it out.
Yeah.